Dr. Floyd, thank you so much for being willing to do this and have this Advent conversation. One of the reasons that I really wanted to have a conversation with you about the pandemic and where God is in all of this is that when you were teaching us, you always had a very broad view of human history. I think because of the depth of your studies in the Hebrew scriptures, that sort of gave you the base for a really broad view. You can sort of step back and see the big picture of human history. And I always appreciated that so much about you. And so sometimes in this pandemic we can get super myopic and so I wanted to be able to step back and have your wisdom on how the larger view of this pandemic and how it relates to biblical stories of pandemics and that kind of thing. So thank you very much for being
Oh,
here.
thanks for inviting me so much. Um, just to get a sort of broad perspective, we should talk about a little bit about plagues in general in the Bible, I think. Um, it's interesting that the word that's used for that in the Bible refers to two different kinds of things. One of them is epidemics of diseases, but the other is natural disasters of a sort. For example, the locusts in the book of Joel are called the plague. If you look at the classic tale, would be the 10 plagues in the lead up to the Exodus. And if you look at those, some of them are like that. Some of them, they're mostly ecological disasters, like polluted water, hailstorms, colossal hailstorms, um, things like that. One of them could be thought of as disease, the boils. And of course, the last one would be the death of the first one would be under the intervention of God. My point in doing that is that plagues are often ecological disasters of one kind or another. And God is involved in them in different ways. If you remember the phrase in the Bible, in the story of the Exodus, is that Pharaoh's heart was hardened. First of all, we should be aware that the same term it gets translated that way, but it's not always the same expression in Hebrew. But in any case, there's an alternation in there between saying God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and therefore this thing happened. And then sometimes it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, his own heart, and that caused this to happen, which shows us this kind of interplay of divine and human agency that's understood to be there. So it's not just an act of God on the one hand, and it's not just human sin on the other hand, but there's this interplay. So I think that's important to keep in mind when we think about the present pandemic, because you hear people ask on the one hand, has God abandoned us? So, and then on the other hand, is God punishing us? So either God's not involved or God is totally responsible for it all. So, and the biblical picture is more that anytime there's a crisis like that, there's this interplay of human and divine agency in it. I think it's helpful to think about that with regard to the pandemic, because I don't see, using a biblical model, there's no way that God could be understood as the cause of the pandemic, except in the sense, of course, that God created the virus, just as he created me and you. And in one sense, a virus is the most natural thing in the world. But on the other hand, it's not natural for a virus to run wild over the whole earth. And that the virus can do that is the result of human activity in creating, through global warming, changes in the ecology of diseases that make it possible for what would be a virus living in a small scale environment with certain animals, maybe occasionally jumping onto human beings, or human beings have viruses too. In a sense, that's the most natural thing in the world. But for the coronavirus to run wild over the earth and to affect the whole world, that's the result of human behavior and failure to take seriously the question of global warming. And in that sense, we can probably imagine that this is not going to be the last of these because the conditions are there for it to happen again unless we do something.
Mm-hmm.
So the Bible wouldn't lead us to see God as the cause of this, but God can work through things like disasters, even if they're caused by human beings. Mm-hmm. My favorite example of this comes from the Joseph story in the Old Testament, where the brothers sold Joseph into slavery, and bad things happened to Joseph, and then the tables were turned, and Joseph became a prince in Egypt, and the brothers went down and had to ask him for grain so that they could live through the famine. And then they get reconciled at the end, but the brothers are afraid that Joseph is going to take revenge on them. And Joseph says to them, no, we're not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything like that. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, so that many people should be alive as at this day. So God took the evil thing that the brothers had done to Joseph and turned it into something that enabled all of Joseph's dependents and relatives to survive the drought and to come to Egypt and to settle there and to flourish. So God turned something that was an evil done by human beings into something that was had a positive result. So God works through the evil things that human beings can create and for good. And I think if we think of the pandemic this way too, even if we see it totally as the result of human agency, we don't think God caused it, but God can work through it. Mm-hmm. Given that once it's set in motion, God can work through it. And in the biblical picture, maybe this is troubling, but sometimes when God enters into the fray that human beings have created, God brings some fray with him. Mm. That's part of the process. That's part of the process by which the evil is turned into something good. Mm. So God works through chaos, but also God brings creative chaos. And so sometimes chaos works for bad, and sometimes chaos works for good. But even when it works for good, there's some collateral damage. So I think that's maybe the hard thing to include. I think it's easy for us to think of God working through evil to bring about good, but if we think of God being involved in bringing more force to the evil, mm-hmm. so that the good can come out of it, mm-hmm. that may be something hard to fathom. I think the Bible, the perspective that the Bible gives us on that is to look at the cosmic picture. Think about the whole creation, and see how the process of chaos works into creation through natural disasters. An interesting program on NPR this morning about people who study meteor crashes on the Earth. What we think that brought about one of the periods of extinction of the dinosaurs. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it also created the possibility that mammals could emerge, and then mm-hmm. eventually us. And then, so if we take that cosmic picture, chaos is just part of the process. Mm-hmm. And it's not. It doesn't always seem fair, but it's awesome. I mean, that's kind of the picture you get when you take the cosmic perspective. And if we have that, if we look out, whether we look out from the Earth into the universe, or we look from space back upon the Earth, mm-hmm. we can see both the beauty and the chaos that's going on there. Mm-hmm. I remember I get this every day. Somebody they send me this NASA picture from outer space, And there was one that came with a picture of a nebula that's near the Milky Way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of the nearest nebula, in which stars are being born. And the caption on it says, within this nebula, we can see both uh, uh, incredible bedlam and amazing beauty.
Wasn't that
And
life something?
that's what, that's the way of describing how these stars are coming to birth, but through this process that's both horrific and beautiful, and
Mm-hmm.
amazingly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Bible doesn't resolve the theodicy question about God's involvement in evil, I think particularly in natural disasters.
Mm-hmm.
But it does offer us this cosmic perspective, in which we see the beauty. Another example of that is Job, when there's this great duel between Job and the Lord has inflicted upon him, or allowed to be afflicted upon him, all these horrible diseases and things. Um, but at the end of the story, there's not a resolution of the obvious injustice involved, but God takes Job on this tour of the cosmos, where he sees all the animals and the weather and the sun, and Job just says, steps back and says, "Wow," uh, and it says, the translation is often translated that Job repented in dust and ashes, but that implies that Job recognized that he was at fault in this
Mm-hmm.
thing, which is not the case.
Right.
Obviously he was not at fault,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't confess to being at fault when he wasn't. The phrase might be better translated that he changed his mind, or he saw the bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
and that put what had happened to him in a different perspective. And God said, in effect, give me a break. Running the universe is a hard job. And said, yeah, okay.
What translation was that? That's great. So I know that this idea that God can work good through chaos, I think is really poignant, and we see it in scripture many times. What is the good that you feel might come out of this? What's the hope in this? Where do you see God at work? In the same way for Joseph saving his kin from the plague. Where's the good here?
Well, I wouldn't want to tell people who experience the death of loved ones with this that, there's some silver lining in this cloud.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying on the one hand, but on the other hand, I have heard people talk about, they've had the opportunity to step back and take a look at their lives and how it's going, and they see the opportunity to make a new beginning. I think people see the opportunity to make, if there's a political will to respond to it, I think people see it as a possibility of a new beginning for our nation as well. It's a chance to take a hard look at the way things are and ask if you want to still be that way, given there'll be so much rebuilding to do. We can see other possibilities for doing things besides building them back the way they were.
Where it pulling back again, the cosmic picture, finally, where is the hope for people in this, would you say?
Again, taking the cosmic perspective in the amazing resiliency of the earth, and the life, God, the abundant life with which God has blessed the earth. Not even our worst management can obliterate that. And if we take the cosmic perspective on it as part of this evolutionary process is just breathtakingly beautiful.